All right, on to part 2. We've got our rule on that first page. I'm gonna go ahead and write that rule that I had, whatever rule that was. So you're gonna wanna do that on your test too if you have a question like this. So we have our rule that we had, and we need to figure out what that real world quantity stands for. So really all you're doing is looking at, this thing here. What was our X, what was our Y? In this case, X is the number of years, Josiah. So X equals the number of years Josiah has had the plant. And Y, since that's the number of tomatoes, she had picked that year. So the number of years Josiah has had the plant, and Y equals the number of tomatoes she had picked that year. And that's what it says on the front. So in order to get our question for C, we have how many tomatoes will Josiah be picking after she has had the plant for 15 years. So we think back to, in our variable X or Y, this thing about years. So 15 years, where would that go? Would that go in your X or your Y? Well, it says right here, it's in our years. So I have to put that 15 in place of the X. So I'm gonna write my equation, Y equals 12, but instead of X, I'm gonna put that 15 in its place. So I have this 15, I multiply it by 12, and then I'm going to add this 2. So if I take 15, and we just take a calculator here, 15 times 12 gives me this, and then I add 2 more, which equals 182. So 12 times 15 plus 2 is 182. 182 what's? It's 182 tomatoes. Make sure you put the label. That's really important. We always want to be sure we put our label for everything that we do. Okay, that's really important. Letter D, this time we're trying to figure out how much time. I told you we kind of reworded this in class, but we want to know how many years it takes to get to 300. So instead of putting this number, the 300, we have to decide whether to put it in for our Y or our X. Well, I already told you that X is our number of years, right? So we already used that one right here. So the 300 is 300 tomatoes. And since Y is the number of tomatoes, I'm gonna put that in place of the Y. So instead of placing it in the X, we're gonna place it right here for the Y. So 300 is going to go here, that's our number of tomatoes, equals 12, because that's part of our rule, times X. We don't know what that is yet. That's what we're trying to solve for. And then we're gonna add 2. So we have learned over and over again that this is a 2-step equation. We've worked a lot with these, and you can use a calculator for them. I think for some of it you won't need it, but so first, in order to get X by itself, we have to subtract 2 from both sides first. So I do that, I draw my line. I've got 300 minus 2 is 298 equals 12x. So the last thing I'm gonna do before I use my calculator here is just show my work that I'm dividing both sides by 12. And when I do that, so I take 298 and I divide by 12. So 298 divided by 12 equals this number. So 24.8 takes about 24.8 years. So almost 25. If you put something like almost 25, that will probably be okay for that. Yeah, 24.8 is fine. So just that decimal will be totally okay. And then we move on from there. Number 5, Richard's frustrated. This is one of the questions we had the first night. He's frustrated because Pretty much he knows one of these equations is correct, but he doesn't know where to put the 4 and the 3. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Remember that this 4 and this 3, where these are right here in place of the, right in front of the x, this is the place for the slope. So this is where we take our rise over run in our slope triangle. And I see over on my graph, I see my slope triangles right here. And when I take my rise and I divide by my run, that's going to give me my slope. So maybe I'll just start there. Or maybe you think it's easier to look just to where it starts. And if you look at the graph of where it starts, where it crosses that line, it actually crosses the y-axis right here at 3. That's our starting value. So based on that alone, we know that this first equation has to be right. So we will say the equation y equals 4x plus 3 is correct. That's the first thing we have to say, just which one's right. And then I have to say how I know that. So you can say something like, I know this because the graph crosses at 3 on the y-axis. And the y-intercept in the equation is also 3. So that's really, if you just told me that and said nothing about the slope, that would totally work. Or you could have said, I looked at my my rise over run on my slope triangle. We had 4 divided by 1, which gives me 4, which does match our slope right here in our equation. So you had to say something about that. All right, so it's a good spot to pause. Make sure you get that down on your paper. And then we will go ahead and move on to our last question on our study guide. Okay, so Bert's teacher asked him to write all these different representations. So we're gonna look at all these things to make sure he didn't make any mistakes, and then we'll go from there. So this tile pattern is correct because his teacher said that everything is based on what he has in this tile pattern. So this, figure 0 has 2, figure 1 has 4, figure 2 has 6, figure 3 has 6 plus 2, which is 8. And so I like to first check my table because usually I get my rule from my table. I can clearly see that. So I'm going to figure out if I have all the right numbers in it. Figure 0 has 2 tiles. Let's see if the graph, the table has that. So 0 has 2. Okay, so far, let's check. Got that. Figure 1 has 4. And sure enough, that's correct. Figure 2 has 4 plus 2 more is 6. Oops, here's his mistake. He did not have 6 for 2. This should have been 6 right there. And 3 has 6, 7, 8. Should not have 12. It should be an 8 instead. All right, so that's one area he messed up on. So based on that, I take my table and I go, okay, I'm going to take my table and I'm going to make sure the rule works. So the first thing I check is our starting value, our b. So if I zoom in here, does our equation have a starting value or y-intercept of 2? Okay, that's what we're looking at here. That's a starting value. And in this case, it does. It does have a starting value of 2. When x is 0, y is 2. So far, so good. That part's good. So now we got to figure out if our slope is correct. Our growth, if x is going up by 1, is y going up by 2? That's what our slope is saying. It's saying it's going up by 2 each time. So if I look at from item to item here, or point to point, 0 to 1 is plus 1, and 2 to 4 is plus 2. And sure enough, 2 divided by 1 is 2, which does match our rule there, our slope. So his rule is fine, that works. So far the table is the only thing that's messed up. So last but not least, we're gonna double check to see if the the graph matches the correct table here. So he may have graphed the incorrect table, but we're gonna check. So first off, I like to label my graph just so I can tell where I'm putting my points. That'll help me decide whether it's correct. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so 0, 2 is the first one. So far, so good. 0, 2, looks good. 1, 4, oops, already. This is a mess up here. 2, 6, 2, 6. So we can tell here already that, this one's actually gonna go off here. 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, it's off. I was looking at the old 12. So we've got our line looks like this is what it should look like. So we should correct that. All right, it says, how did Bert do? What I want to say is, what are the things that he messed up on? So Bert didn't do the table or graph correctly. On the table, he went up by 4 instead of 2. On the graph, he graphed the points wrong. So it looks like the first point he messed up on was this 1, 4. He actually went like over 1, up, 2 and something. So you probably could say something about that. And because of time, I need to make sure this video is a certain length. I will go ahead and stop there. So be sure that tonight, once again, I told you, you get automatically you get 5 points just for having all of this correctly filled out. And part of that is because I want you to have it filled out so you could actually take it home and study it tonight. And that way, if there's anything like this on your test, you'll have an idea of what it looks like. So make sure you study, you take notes, you watch this video over again if you have to, and you'll do awesome on your test. All right, good luck to you. Tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow, and make sure and study. See you later.